My name is Captain Claire Hartley. I am 36 years old, and when I arrived at a decommissioned base to retrieve classified equipment on a Thursday morning in October, someone was already there. They were wearing my unit's uniform. Not a similar uniform, not an approximation. My unit's uniform. The correct patches, the correct rank, the correct designation on the sleeve. The base had been decommissioned for 2 years. No active personnel, no scheduled operations, no authorized presence of any kind. I had the only active retrieval order for that location. I was supposed to be the only person there. I parked my vehicle. I did not get out immediately. I sat for 40 seconds and I watched the figure move through the compound. They moved like a soldier, deliberate, purposeful. They knew the layout. That was the detail that stopped me. The base had been decommissioned 2 years ago. The layout was not public information. You had to have served there or have access to classified facility records to know where you were going in that compound. I got out of my vehicle. I did not announce myself. I followed them.
Let me tell you about the mission first. Classified equipment retrieval is routine work. A decommissioned base retains certain assets until they can be properly cataloged and transferred. The process is administrative, thorough, documented at every step. I had been assigned this retrieval 3 days earlier. Standard order. Signed by my commanding officer, Major Daniel Webb, countersigned by the Logistics Division. Everything correct, everything clean. The base was called Facility 7 in the internal system. It had been a signals intelligence station, operational for 11 years, decommissioned when the program it supported was shut down and consolidated elsewhere. I had served there once, a 3-month posting 6 years ago. I knew the layout. I knew the main building, the equipment storage annex, the communications tower in the northeast corner. I knew where I was going. So did the person in my unit's uniform. They were heading directly for the equipment storage annex, the exact building I had been sent to access.
The object at the center of everything that followed was a patch, specifically the unit patch on the left sleeve of their uniform. My unit's patch is distinctive, a specific design authorized in 2019, not widely known outside the unit, not something you could order online or fabricate easily without access to the original specifications. As I followed them across the compound, I kept my eyes on that patch. It was perfect. Not a copy, not a reproduction, the exact patch issued to members of my unit, which meant 2 things. Either this person was a member of my unit and had been sent here without my knowledge, or someone had obtained an authorized uniform from inside my unit. Both possibilities were serious. The second one was worse. I followed them into the equipment storage annex. The building was dark inside, emergency lighting only, the kind that casts long shadows and turns ordinary spaces into something else entirely. They had a torch, a military-grade one. They moved it methodically across the shelving units. They were looking for something specific, not cataloging, not retrieving broadly, looking for one thing. I stepped into the doorway. I said, "Identify yourself, now." She reached slowly into her left breast pocket. She produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out. I crossed the room. I took it. I unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, 3 sentences. The handwriting was familiar in a way that took me 3 seconds to place. Then I placed it. It was my own handwriting. I need to tell you about the note. 3 sentences, written in my own hand, on paper I did not remember touching. The first sentence said, "Trust her. She is doing what I asked." The second sentence said, "The equipment in Bay 7 is not what the retrieval order says it is." The third sentence said, "Webb,
nose. I read it 3 times. My handwriting, my phrasing, the specific way I form certain letters that my mother used to say was too small and too angular for anyone to read comfortably. I had not written this note. I was certain of that. I was equally certain it was my handwriting. I looked at the young woman. I said, "Where did you get this?" She said, "A man gave it to me 4 days ago. He said to bring it here and give it to you when you found me." I said, "What man?" She said, "He didn't give me his name. He said you would know who sent it by the handwriting." I said, "I didn't write this." She said, "I know." I said, "Then how?" She said, "He showed me how it was made. He said it would be important for you to know that someone can replicate your handwriting well enough to pass close inspection. He said that information is relevant to something that is about to happen to you." I stood in that dark building with the emergency lighting casting long shadows. I said, "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Lieutenant Sara Chen. I was assigned to a research unit 18 months ago. 3 weeks ago, I was told the research was being shut down, and the research was being destroyed." She said, "The research is in Bay 7. She said, "It is not supposed to be destroyed. It is supposed to disappear, quietly, before anyone can see what it contains." I said, "What does it contain?"
She said, "Evidence of a program that has been running inside this institution for 11 years, using fabricated documents, forged signatures, and at least 40 cases of manufactured evidence used to remove personnel who asked the wrong questions." She paused. She said, "You are the 41st case. The order to fabricate evidence against you was signed 6 days ago." I stood very still. 6 days ago, 3 days before I received my retrieval order. Webb had signed the retrieval order. Webb had signed the evidence fabrication order. I said, "How long do we have?" She said, "The destruction order executes at 1400. It is 11:47 now." I had 2 hours and 13 minutes. I said, "Show me Bay 7. I want to pause here, because what was in Bay 7 is the part that required me to make every decision in the next 2 hours correctly. If you have ever had 2 hours to fix something that took 11 years to build, drop a comment below. And subscribe right now, because what we found in Bay 7 and what I did with it in 133 minutes is the part that changed everything. Bay 7 was at the back of the annex, a standard storage unit, locked. Lieutenant Chen had the key. She had been given it by the man who also had my handwriting. Inside were 12 boxes, standard military archive containers, each one labeled with a case number. No names on the labels, just numbers. Chen knew the system. She had worked with it for 18 months. She said each case number corresponds to a personnel file, an officer who was removed from service on disciplinary grounds over the past 11 years. 40 cases, each one supported by fabricated evidence manufactured within this unit. I said, "What kind of evidence?" She said, "Financial records showing misappropriation, forged communications, altered performance assessments. In 3 cases, medical records suggesting psychological instability." I said, "How do you know it was fabricated?" She said, "Because I was the one fabricating it." She said it without flinching. She said, "I was 22 when I was recruited. I was told the work was counterintelligence, removing compromised personnel. I believed them for 16 months. Then I started cross-referencing the cases myself. The patterns didn't match genuine misconduct. They matched something else." I said, "What did they match?" She said, "They matched personnel who had filed complaints or submitted reports that threatened specific programs, or asked questions about budget irregularities that someone senior didn't want asked." She said, they weren't compromised, they were inconvenient. I said, and the 41st case? She said, you submitted an anomaly report 8 weeks ago, a budget irregularity in the logistics division. You flagged it through proper channels and received an acknowledgement. 8 weeks ago. The report I had filed and forgotten about because it had been acknowledged, and I had assumed it was being handled. It had been handled, just not the way I had assumed. I said, what is in my case file? She said, forged financial records showing unauthorized access to classified accounts, timestamped to 3 months ago, supported by fabricated communication logs. She said the order is to present the evidence next week at a formal review board. You would have no way to refute it because the fabrication is thorough. I said, how thorough? She said, thorough enough that I built it. I said, then you know exactly how to dismantle it. She said, yes. I said, good. Start with my file. 133 minutes. Chen knew the system. I knew how evidence is authenticated and how it is challenged. Together, we worked through the boxes methodically. Chen identified the fabricated elements in each file, the specific signatures that were not genuine, the timestamps that had been altered, the metadata that contradicted the surface documents. I documented everything on my personal device, encrypted, photographed every page that mattered. We reached my file at 13:22, 38 minutes before the destruction order executed. My file was thorough. Chen had not been wrong about that. The financial records were detailed, the communication logs were convincing, the timestamps were internally consistent. But Chen knew where every seam was. She pointed, I photographed. Every fabricated element, documented. At 13:51, I made the call. Colonel Patricia Morrison, Inspector General's office. She answered in 2 rings. I said, Colonel, I am at Facility 7. I have a Lieutenant Sara Chen with me and 12 boxes of fabricated evidence used to remove 40 personnel over 11 years. I have complete documentation of the fabrication methodology. I have evidence that a destruction order executes in 9 minutes. I need you to stop it, and I need people here now. Morrison said 3 words, do not leave. She stopped the destruction order at 13:58, 2 minutes before execution. Morrison's team arrived in 40 minutes. They secured the 12 boxes. They secured the annex. They interviewed Chen for 3 hours. Chen cooperated fully. Everything. The recruitment, the 16 months she believed it was legitimate, the moment she understood what she was actually doing, the 3 weeks between the shutdown order and the day she put on my unit's uniform and went to a decommissioned base to find me. She had chosen the uniform deliberately. She said she needed me to take her seriously immediately. She knew if she arrived in civilian clothes or an unrelated uniform, I might not stop, might not follow, might not give her the 40 seconds she needed to hand me the note. The note she had written herself, in my handwriting, replicating it from documents she had studied as part of the fabrication process. She had used the tools of the program against the program. I found that particular detail worth sitting with for a long time. The investigation ran for 8 months. Major Daniel Webb was arrested in week 3. The charges were significant: conspiracy to fabricate military evidence, abuse of authority, obstruction. 11 years of misconduct documented across 40 case files. He was convicted on all counts 7 months later. He is serving 14 years. 2 other senior officials connected to the program were investigated. One pleaded guilty to a reduced charge, one went to trial and lost. The 40 personnel who had been removed on fabricated evidence. 31 were still alive. All 31 received formal notifications that their cases were under review. 17 had their service records corrected. 11 received reinstatement offers. 8 accepted. 9 of the 40 had died in the years since their removal. Their families were notified. Their service records were corrected posthumously.
I attended 2 of the family notifications, not because I was required to, because it seemed like the right thing to do. Lieutenant Sara Chen. She faced her own process. She had fabricated evidence. That was real. That had consequences for real people. She cooperated fully. She provided the complete methodology. She testified in every proceeding that required her testimony. Her cooperation was noted. Her sentence was reduced significantly. She served 8 months. Her record reflects what she did and what she did to address it. I wrote a letter on her behalf before sentencing, not asking for leniency, asking for accuracy, that the record reflect not just the 16 months she spent building the program, but the 3 weeks she spent dismantling it at significant personal risk. The judge read the letter into the record. I do not know what Sara Chen will do next. I hope it is something that uses the specific skills she has in a direction that does not require her to forfeit 8 months of her life. She is 26 years old. She has time. The handwritten note is in the evidence archive now. My handwriting, not mine. I have thought about it often, about what it means that someone studied my handwriting closely enough to replicate it, that the same skill used to fabricate evidence against me was used to warn me that the evidence existed. The same tool, 2 directions. That is the thing I keep returning to. Every capability that exists can be used in more than one direction. Chen used what she knew to build a trap for 40 people. Then she used what she knew to dismantle it. What she knew did not change. What she chose to do with it did. Here is what a decommissioned base and a stranger in my uniform taught me. When something is wrong, follow the thread, even when the thread leads somewhere you did not expect, even when the person holding the other end of the thread is wearing your face or your uniform or your handwriting. Ask who sent you, listen to the answer, then make the call. That is my story. 1 retrieval order, 1 stranger, 133 minutes, and 14 years. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. Same ending every time. She stayed calm, she stayed quiet, then she won.